Everybody. Welcome to Radio Sophia, Doctoral Lab. I am Kranti, a PhD student in economics group at IIM Calcutta, and I'll be the moderator for today's session. Come to discuss socioeconomic and political issues and bring academicians and non-academicians together. But Doctoral Lab is one of the key segments on Radio Sophia dedicated to research scholars exclusively. And this doctoral lab actually aims to facilitate interaction among the current PhD students, faculty, researchers outside academic institutions. And the main reason doctoral lab is started is because as academicians, most of us are very busy and solo lives and interests. We occasionally get to hear about our colleagues' works or research projects in official setup through structured academic presentations. But I would like to believe that most of us have much more to share about our research beyond a paper or a conference presentation, about interesting theories, models, methods, or topics that we come across in our journey as PhD students and even thereafter. So I think agree that such discussions will actually help us to pursue this process as a scholarly journey rather than a process of research for the sake of spirit. I'm really excited to take forward the series of discussion called Doctoral Lab on Radio Sophia with today's speaker, Amit Jain. Amit is currently Center for Disability and Integration, University of St. Gallen at Gallen, Switzerland. He is one of the 4 Swiss Government Excellence Scholarship for postdoctoral studies in Switzerland. And prior to that, Amit completed his PhD from IIM Calcutta in the department graduation in management from IIM Ahmedabad and worked for 8 years with various corporates. His research intakes and careers. And without any further ado, let me welcome one of our dearest seniors at PhD in Joka, and also a very proud alumnus of IIM for accepting this invitation and joining us today.
Yeah. Thank you, Kranti. I think it's an opportunity for me as well to share my thoughts. And I hope, if not anything, just to give people who are planning where the things come into picture and how things have been and things could be for you to have a disclaimer. So whatever I will be sharing is basically my personal experience, and you have a different experience, or you may agree or disagree with it. But it's just my experience which I will be sharing, and will be do it as a Q&A. So just to give you a brief background about my journey in PhD. So that's what I would say I will have a plan. Yeah. Thanks a lot. And organization behavior group. So IIM Calcutta is very particular about that. We call it a group, not department. Because that's something which you have to be very careful at IIM Calcutta, because department and group are they considered a very different one. So anyways, journey for thinking of PhD, I will not get into why I did PhD and all. But yeah, only one thing I would say is that I did some visiting faculty assignments, and teaching was something which was good. And I was involved with one of the programs called Giving Voice to Values, which was a program at that point of time funded by Aspen Institute. Now it's with the University of Mary Gentile. So I was working with her on certain case studies about business ethics, and that's how I came to know a bit about research or a bit about case study writing. Point of time, I thought it would be a good idea to just start with doing the PhD, and then I applied to IIM Ahmedabad, Bangalore, Calcutta. From Ahmedabad, I thought let's go to the eastern side of India and do IIM Calcutta for my PhD, and luckily I got admission here, and it was later renamed an organization group. And initially it was a change, because from the corporate world altogether, looking at things, understanding things, and the rigor of academic research rigor was high, and that's why the coursework. So since I was an MBA from IIM Ahmedabad, so I got directly into the second year, had a good 1 year coursework, which is what the system of management research here is. And then came the important part of a PhD thesis. That's the phase. And I will break this phase into my journey into 4 phases rather than 1. So initially it was to outline and to freeze on the research you want to do. And then getting into the data collection and then data analysis and defense. Regarding my first experience at the or rather say research question phase, it was basically to look at, initially I wanted to do something on this thing which I wanted to do, and I zeroed in on generation diversity and disability diversity as the 2 topics I would like to work. And with my thesis advisor, Professor Leena Chatterjee and Professor Abhishek Goyal, we had a lot of discussion as to which one would be a better one. And we realized that the literature on generation diversity which is there in the market is more to do with older generation, while the Indian workforce being more younger, main perspective. And we thought that disability diversity is something which would be a better fit. And I did my summers also project on disability diversity. So it was, I would say, an extension to what I was doing at that point of time. So we agreed on disability diversity. Then I was started to look at disability identity as an area of disability diversity. And a lot of discussion, a lot of meetings happened, but somehow the research question was not coming out to be very clear. And at a certain point of time, we had to drop that idea and come up with another idea. And that another idea was actually a very big shift for me, because from qualitative research, I went towards the quantitative side. Because here now we are not looking at a particular concept per se, like a disability identity, but looking at the relation, looking at a more explanation rather than, if I put it, exploration versus and explanation. So it was more of an explanation about theory. So that's where I started work on inclusion of persons with disabilities and how the personality matters. And yeah, I did some background work, some research, came up with my hypothesis and defined my thesis proposal. And here I think research proposal is that it's the main thing. I know everybody would say, yes, that's exactly the same, that it's the main thing, but I would not put any more emphasis on anything else than this, because this is the foundation on which your whole thesis depends. Even if you get a good data, if you analyze it good, even if you do a good writing, but if you're, it's a very difficult challenge for us. And I think somewhere, because there was a change in the topic, I always feel that my research question could have been better per se. But yeah, at that point of time, whatever the limited resources I had, I did that. And then came the second phase of data analysis. And that's where my second, I would not say challenge, but the second learning I had was about data collection in India, especially when you're into a niche area. As an area means I have to find persons with disabilities. I have to find them who are working, and I have to find them who are working who can understand a scale, because it's a quantitative study, who can understand English language, because then translating the instrument, the surveys into local language, and then doing all those stuff was, and it took me close to 15 months to finally get some reasonable data in place, which I could analyze. So during your research question itself, you need to understand, is there a data area which I can explore, which I can get? Because I've seen some of my colleagues who were very clear about the data from which they want to collect the data. And once they have that idea, they research, after their research question, they were able to collect data. Very biggest hurdle per se into my thesis journey. And it took me the longest time. Once the data collection was done, the third phase was to data analysis. And since I told you initially my work was on the qualitative, and then I moved to quantitative, I need to learn a lot of new quantitative methods. And like I did a lot on SE, out of these things for putting the analysis in the right frame. And I was presenting my work in some of the conferences as well, and where I got the idea where I was going right, where I was going wrong. I think that's an important aspect. Presenting your work, times maybe you and your advisors are thinking in a particular direction, but maybe the other people are looking at it in a very different way. So it's always a good idea to present your work in conferences when you're doing your analysis, because that gives you a confidence. And once you have done your analysis, you know your stuff. So I think that's an important aspect to do. And so that's the third, I think, stage on data analysis. And the last one on writing, I think it's also very important as to what type of things you're writing. Groups want to look at monologue, one single thesis, or others have this 3 essays or 2 essays format, where they just put 2 or 3 papers and combine them together, link them with each other through this thing, and do that. Both have their advantages and disadvantages, and you will always have your support from the guide. But yes, that's an important one, because if it's a monologue, then writing it back to papers becomes a bit difficult. But on the other hand, if you have 3 papers, sometimes you feel, are they disconnected? Are they interconnected? How I need to look for? So that's the point. Mine was a monologue, and yes, today if I look at getting some papers published from this thing, sometimes I do face some challenge in it. So yeah, that's, I'm not sure whether it's so short, but that's the journey I had. And I think now we can start with question answers, because that way I can give more details about me or my journey as PhD.
And very interesting way of explaining what hurdles can come and how to understand the process of the whole PhD from the scratch till the end. So your title, thesis title is that relationship of workplace inclusion with personal dispositional factors and job satisfaction, a study of persons with disabilities in India, right? But can you begin with defining or explaining briefly what is disability and who are called persons with disabilities?
Okay, there is this an interesting paper on what is disability, and that's an interesting one. And I'm not talking about the common sense, but in a research term, that's an area where we talk about two definitions. One, if you have a particular impairment, maybe I'm not able to see properly, or maybe I'm not able to walk properly, or I'm using wheelchair. So they have these certain conditions that, okay, if any of these physical impairment is there, that is defined as disability. And each government may have their own requirements on criteria, like Government of India have their own disability, 10% disability, or 40% and above is a disability where you need some support. While there's another definition which comes out, which does not look at your physical impairment, but your functionality. Are you able to, like in the definition of administration, it is more to do with, do you have one leg, do you have two legs, how much eyesight do you have? But the World Health Organization work of what is called as ICF, functionality perspective. So can you do your daily work? Can you go for walk? Can you do your work? So they more look at a functionality perspective. So it was an very interesting paper in International Journal of Human Resource Management by David Dwartman, who happens to be the PhD student of my host, my guide, as to how disability research in management is challenging because of one of the biggest issue being of the definition of disability, which comparative studies becomes a lot of challenge.
Okay, great. What is the approximate population of PWD or persons with disabilities in India and abroad, or how many of them are employed?
Yes. Yeah. So just to give you perspective on persons with disabilities, if we look at the WHO definition, and it is 15% of the population in the whole world is person with disabilities, can be defined as persons with disabilities, because they don't just look at the physical disability, they look at the other learning disabilities. So they have a lot of definitions in the functioning of that. So 15%. If we look at from the Indian government perspective, it is close to, I think, 5 or 6% of persons with disabilities based on the definition which India has adopted. And if I'm looking at how many are employed, out of those persons with disability who are in the working age in India, at this point of time, close to, in public sector organization, the workforce. So it's around 1%, or I think 0.8% of the workforce in public sector, and around 0.35% of the workforce in the private sector are persons with disability. Previous Act of Disability in India in 1995 required 3%, and the current Act, 2016 Act, requires to be reserved for persons with disability. So that's something which is surprising, that even after such things, even in public sector, it should be.
Right. Okay. So now moving to the main topic, where we are talking about diversity or inclusion of persons with disabilities, the idea of inclusion, right? So in organizations, what are the persons with disability experience exclusion? In organizations or in general, especially in workplaces, what are the ways in which we can perceive it?
Right. So inclusion, I will go with. So this, I'm talking more from a research perspective again, because I think that's how I've been studying, reading, and there was a 2011 paper by many scholars, including the main scholar being Professor. She did a very interesting 2x2 matrix, and this is consulting matrix, where they talked about being belonging to the group or the organization, and the second part is to feel unique, that I'm part of the organization, but I'm also unique, which is required, or which is what you can say valued by the organization, valued by the group. So just that I'm part of you does not mean certain skills, certain abilities of mine. And when you have these both within a group or within an organization, that's where the inclusion comes into picture. And they came up with this 2x2 matrix, and then they said that when the person does not feel that the organization is feeling that I'm part of them, that feeling of belongingness is not there. Plus, they do not value my uniqueness. They do not value my abilities. That's where the challenge comes of accumulating me in you. because you're just saying, okay, you are also part of us, but what you bring as a unique person, we don't value that. Or in the case, if I'm looking at more of like people who come as expats, many of the times they do not integrate, or they do not work with the organization, because not because they don't want to belong. I'm an expatriate, I'm an expat, I'm just here for a particular skill which I have, which you don't have. So that's just the uniqueness. But when you have this combination, I would say inclusion comes into picture, and some authors later on called the uniqueness can be further looked at into authenticity. Am I feeling authentic? Yes, I have that unique, authentic ID. So that would be inclusion in my view. And that's inclusion can happen at your work group, just with your supervisor, with the organization. Your work group may be including you, but the organization may not be, the senior management may not be. And it's not just the formal, it can be informal. So it can be at a lot of places. So yeah, that's inclusion, I would say.
Okay. Okay. So now that we are here already talking about some of the concepts of belongingness, or how I perceive my belongingness as a person with disability, your thesis title also talks about dispositional factors,
Yeah,
right? So personal dispositional
right,
factors.
right.
In fact, you're trying to understand the relation between them, or how this whole idea of inclusion mediates between these two. So
True,
can you
true, true.
elaborate a little bit on that? So what are these personal dispositional factors? And also you're talking about core self-evaluation, like some
Yeah.
of these concepts, and what do they mean? Yeah.
Yeah, personal dispositional factors is basically we have the situational factors and the dispositional factors. Situational factors is there is a part of my personality which comes into picture on a particular situation. So say there is a fire around, so that's a personality which comes out as more of like on a situation perspective. But there's a dispositional which is more stable within me, which is more in within the organization. While I have a different personality, say at home, but there is a personality in me, there's a trait in me which is more stable. Okay, and that's where the word dispositional comes into picture. And I have been very reminded, it particularly very nice, that it is not just personal factors but personal dispositional factors. And why I looked at this particular aspect is that if I look at the work of inclusion within the management field, the focus of inclusion was always been what can organization do, what can the leaders do, or even what can the co-workers do to ensure that their or inclusion in general, maybe other stigmatized identities like maybe uh, gender at workplace, or LGBT at workplace, or age. So a lot of other stigmatized identities, you can say. But what I really went to look for was that are there things which a person with disability was, or what that means was they were assuming that all persons are the same. So if a person with disability come, his personality, his own views does not matter. What really matters, disability as an identity. So I said, no, there could be things that a person with disability is more included within the organization, and another person with disability who's in the same organization, in the same team, maybe feel excluded within the organization. So is there a factor of that individual itself? As I used to jokingly say, I was looking at the person in the person with disabilities. I'm not looking at the disability, but I'm looking at the person in the person with disabilities to see, is that person the inclusion? And that's where this whole how do I see myself, and that's where the concept of core self-evaluation came, which was a core variable, or which was a concept which was started it, which talked about that we have certain evaluation which how we evaluate ourselves. So it and it talked about four things: my self-worth, which is what they measured through self-esteem; the generalized self-efficacy, how can I do work; internal locus control, and how can that do I see that whatever is happening with me is happening because of me, is something which is under my control, or is it something which is happening outside, which is in the outside world, maybe power, maybe love, emotional stability, or emotional management. So that was something which just came, and I thought that this is very interesting. How do a person with disability evaluates himself, herself? Does he see himself, herself as a victim, or does he thought this is a very interesting concept to look at person with for persons with disability? Does core self-evaluation really? That's where I thought it would be a good idea to study core self-evaluation thing for persons with disability. And with some literature research, I came to know that for core self-evaluation of persons with disabilities, they also talked about extroversion, or I'm an introvert. So I thought, let's add this thing. So that's why these 5 concepts within core self-evaluation is what I looked for, like self-esteem, generalized self-efficacy, internal locus of control, emotional stability, and extroversion. So these were the things in the side as to does these impact inclusion, and then I said, let's also look at inclusion in job satisfaction. Is inclusion also having an impact on it? So initially we thought we should look at job satisfaction and organization commitment, but this survey was becoming very long, and that's another big challenge you will face within your thesis sometimes, that when you're developing a survey for something, you have to also keep in mind that what should be the good length of a survey. It becomes too long, then people may lose interest in your work, and they may not fill this survey. So, and I realized during my pilot study that this is going to happen. This is happening.
Okay.
So then in the main study, I dropped the idea of organization commitment, and then look at job satisfaction being one of the important aspects. Are we satisfied with our job? Yeah.
So, okay. So you have, as I understand, you have almost surveyed some 441 participants,
True.
right? Okay, so can you tell us now some interesting experiences or some insights in this? First, talk about your insights that have come out of the survey, and also to some of the interesting experiences and learnings other than your survey.
Okay, insights about my survey. There was a
Right.
I would first talk about, because thesis, at least those who are at IIM Calcutta can look at thesis. I know thesis is not something to be read. That means it's such a long document, maybe not. But first and foremost, when I was correcting the survey, one, talking to organization was a fun. Because there was a lot of discussion, and they used to say everything is good. I said, okay, fine, because in the person with disability, the social desirability becomes a very important factor. And that's where I had to look at all these sources I could use, whether it was corporates, whether it was NGOs, whether it was my own connects. I have to find out anything and everything to do that. And when I was started with my analysis of the survey, an interesting thing came up was that we all assume that person with disability will have a lower self-esteem as compared to non-disabled. And that's something which we all assumed, even me assumed that we may have this thing. But when we started analyzing the data, we realized that it was actually higher. And that was a surprising thing for me, that the self-esteem was higher for person with disabilities than what we assume. So it was at a higher, if you look at the data, it was at the higher end. So I think out of 4, if I look at, it was close to around 3 or something average, which was high. It was supposed to be 2.5, between 2.5 or something, if it has to be normally distributed. And I was like, why this thing is happening? And then I started speaking to some of the people who took this survey, who I knew personally. And then I realized that how they are looking at themselves is not through the lens that I'm a person with disability, and there's this guy who's person without disability. So I'm not comparing myself to a person when I'm looking at my self-worth. That comparison also comes themselves to person without disability.
Right.
But what they were comparing themselves was with people with disabilities who are not employed. And that's where the interesting finding came into picture. And I was talking to my host, my guide here, was Stefan, and he said this is one of the interesting things which none of the, this is an interesting one. How do you look at this thing? So this is one of the interesting findings I had. Apart from that, I think the emotions, stability, or instability played an important part, either with inclusion or with job satisfaction. Why we all assume that emotions came into picture. When we further analyzed it, we realized that person with disability, because of societal barriers they had to face, I think they're in a much better position to deal with their emotions. And how do they deal with the emotions does not really impact them. And I would say the third one which came interesting was that internal locus of control. So if you feel, and I'm not sure how this thing will work out, say in another option, but for at least for persons with disability, if you feel told, that way it will be very important, very interesting to do, and will have a positive impact on your inclusion and job satisfaction. But if you feel that the outsole, then it will impact your job, your inclusion, your job satisfaction. So I think these are the 3 which
more question to ask, and after that I'll open the floor for discussion, and the participants can interact with you and ask questions.
Yeah.
So my so organizational studies literature in general. So how much have we done justice to talking about the topic of personal? What more can be done? What more can be studied in this regard?
That's good. How much have they done OB as a research area into disability, diversity? It's huge. we have a lot of departments. But within, I think a lot needs to be done. A lot has been done, but lots needs to be done. Because if I look at the number of researchers and the group of researchers who are working, would not be more than 15 or 20 around the world. So, like in India, I know Professor Mukta Kulkarni works on Adrian Colella, David Baldry. So, the top notch are around 5-6 people. And after that, other researchers are around 10, 12 more. At max, 15 or 20 people who are working on persons with disabilities work. So, we are still in a very big minority. And disability, or rather 3 now, I think Bangalore has also started, but till now there are only 2 research centers on disability which are working in the world. One is at Cornell University under Professor Brewers, and one is the one which I'm working right now here at CDS at St. Gallen. So there are only 2 such research centers. I think Professor Mukta Kulkarni started 3rd, so if that's working now, that will be 3rd. That's it. Otherwise, there is no center. So that's where my experience of working with the my colleague from the MIS department, Professor Divya Sharma, was an interesting one, because that realized me that a lot can be done in the area of control for persons with disability.
Absolutely, right. Before opening the discussion, so this paper with Divya Sharma is about work visually impaired bankers in India, right?
Yeah.
So this is in specific about what is the support given to the visually impaired bankers, or what are the key aspects that you've looked at in this paper?
Okay. So the literature talked about that people who join workforce, persons with visually impaired. Here we specifically, it was a qualitative research, so we specifically looked at a particular aspect of working with public sector banks in India. And we wanted to know an interesting fact that most of the research till now had been talking about what happens when the person joins an organization. So he requests for certain assistive technologies, certain what you can say accessible stuff and all, and he is getting, and then but how does the co-worker treats him or her, how the supervisor treats him or her, how the organization deal with him or her. But what we didn't realize it, then it built through these requests of assistive technologies, accessibility and all, how does that individual do the work within the organization? So, and that's where I said, as I said, that MIS to look at. And one of when I was talking to Divya Sharma, we came across this thought of workarounds.
Right.
People may be doing workarounds. We all know that we all do workarounds, which can give you an idea. And that's where we both looked at this aspect, and we felt that yes, workarounds is something which we can study. And then we took the interviews, and when we were analyzing the interviews, we talked about workarounds. And during the analysis, we realized that workaround is good, but the support of the people within the team is very important, because there will be certain cases where the workaround does not work. So that's why initially we thought it about workarounds of persons with disabilities, but then we said no, it's workaround and social support, and then we talked about these 2 aspects in the paper.
Then I will just open the floor for the discussion, and if you have your microphone and ask directly, or you can even type in the chat box. Anybody?
Yeah, hello, Amit sir. Hi, this is Lalit.
Hi, Lalit.
Yeah, I was just wondering, you were just discussing the role of ICT for in the research for disability, and I want to understand it more. Means, how can you see, or what do you find in that, or as you mentioned, what?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So Lalit, first of all, workaround is basically when there is a specification and people are following that process. Say I have to do step 1, step 2, step 3, but I know at step 2, because my system is not accessible through. So how does a person with visual impairment works on a computer? He uses a screen reader because he can't see. He uses a screen reader. And say suppose in a process in step 2, you have to look at something and then only you can work on it. Now that's something which a person with the disability, if the screen reader is not able to read what is there on the screen, the person is stuck at screen 2. He will not be in a position to do screen 3. But he then knows that, okay, somebody has told him that it's screen 2, this comes in, and he comes out with, okay, if I can do control A, controls on a word and see what it is written, then I can do that work. But that's something which was not supposed to be a part of process. I do have to do a workaround on that, right? So that's where I studied the workaround as to how do they manage when they are stuck with a particular issue. Like in the Outlook, they started putting in this some box in place, and in that box they used to put the text. Now that box was inaccessible through the screen reader software. So they had to paste the text in that to read the email and do it on a text file or a Word file, and then do it through their screen reader. So that was the workaround. So that's the idea of the workaround in this thing. If you ask me about the ICT's role in disability, huge, humongous. There are lots of opportunities in it. Computer and human interaction would be one, where I think somewhere workaround will also come into picture. How the humans, a person with disability, interacts with the computer. There could be things which can be looked at about how the organizations, the IT organizations, like persons with disabilities as a particular group. Like an example could be how the mobiles have become much more accessible now as compared to this thing. So I see a lot of opportunities, because a blind person, especially a blind person, and today you can say even other persons are dependent on technology, information technology, as to how they deal with people. So what can be, where we all discussing about, I always have a discussion with Divya about other options, that can we do something else on ICTs and their role for persons with disabilities. So I see a lot of, at this point of time, ask me if there is a research question. Yes, ICTs, yes.
One more question, sir. It is just, do you find it like some type of disability are more assisted by ICT and some are not? For example, if somebody has a problem in his leg,
yeah,
in some manner, but
yes,
like for example, as you,
I would say that it depends on the functionality. So as I said, for if I'm looking at a workplace, yes, visually impaired will be definitely one of the things. So if the functionality is towards the workplace. So if a person who is a wheelchair user, okay, so at the workplace, I don't think so he will be, apart from the physical this thing, ICT would not be the big case. But maybe ICT could be, information and communications could be more important for him for say in another functionality. So since I'm an OB researcher, my work has been only in the workplace most of the time. And that's where the first one comes into my mind is visually impaired. The second one which comes into mind is hearing impaired, because they cannot listen. So transcription, how that is done, how the transcription in that, because they only can see. So how information technology can work for them would be another thing. And that's where I love the WHO definition, because it talks not about your problem, it talks about your functionality. Because when you start looking at functionality, you will be able to underline the question better.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lalit. Regarding the process of postdoc and other continuation with Amit's research topic and thesis to the questions raised by Akash. Anyone?
Hi, Amit, sir, this is Shailendra.
Hi, Shailendra.
That your research question could have been better or something else.
Yeah.
So now, what would be your research question pertaining to this data and this subject?
I think one of the things I could have say better, but if I had in my survey certain organization factors and controlling for those, then I could say that these personal factors are above all the organization factors. So I think that's added to my work. And secondly, I think I could say maybe not job satisfaction, maybe something else. And third, I survey in a more, I would not say proper format, but what I see nowadays people doing is that they are looking at scales with more, maybe my choices for my personal factors could have been different.
Thank you.
Anybody else? If anybody else asks now, otherwise we'll move on to question by Akash. All right. Amitji, meanwhile, we'll to do with your work, we can continue. So Akash, the first question is, when to pursue a postdoc? When is the best time for a postdoc? Immediately post PhD or after a few years of PhD? what should one expect from a postdoc? Also, in continuation, was your postdoc a mixture of research and teaching engagements? If not, how does one hone one's teaching skills when one is going for a postdoc immediately post PhD that involves only research? You can choose to answer.
There's a lot of questions Akash has asked, but yeah, I will try to answer all of those questions. Should we go for a PhD postdoc just after PhD or after some time? This is a question which I had in mind before coming here for postdoc, and I had a discussion with people who had done their postdoc before, some who have done it at the beginning, and some who had done it after working for 2 to 3 years and then going for a postdoc. For me, the deciding factor was at this point of time I was getting a scholarship, so I thought it was a good idea to go right now. But and maybe after 3 years, I may not get the scholarship or may not get the support which I was looking for from the host. So at this point of time, Professor Stephen Boham was ready to host me, but because you need a host to host you, do that. And maybe after 3 years or 2 years, I may not get. So that's the reason I did it. If you ask me, I would say it would be a better idea to do it after 2 years or 3 years of your PhD. Because during that time, one, you will realize that maybe during your work, you're not able to give that much time for research, but you have the ideas of research, so that you need to do the research much better, because you now know that I have to, this is the time I have to do it, otherwise I will miss that bus again. So that's one. Secondly, you will, after working for 2-3 years of PhD, you may have a different field. So you will do a postdoc with somebody in a very different field, which gives you an added opportunity to work with a PhD with somebody else who is good at a particular thing, and a postdoc on a particular topic, which is a different topic. So if possible, always look for postdoc, say 2 years after your PhD, when you have, but if you have obviously that comes that you have a job, and the people who has to are ready to give you a 1 year or 2 year break, and your job is intact after your PhD, after your postdoc, sorry, because otherwise a bit of your late time in your postdoc will be what will happen once I move back to my country. So that way would be I would say after the PhD, just after the PhD, after 1 or 2 years. But if you are getting an opportunity right now, say with a scholarship or with somebody who is ready to host you just after PhD, a bird in hand is better than two in the bush. I would definitely say that. So do take it. Coming to the point of whether it's teaching or research, it's just research. As far as because my postdoc was funded by the government, so there was no teaching requirement per se with me on this, that I have to do teaching. But I worked with Professor Stephan on certain courses of his, not much, but yes, I have done. I supported him on some of the courses, on some of the stuff, some of his projects. So that's true. But if your postdoc is funded by your host, by his or her funds, then they will definitely expect more just than your research, and they may ask you from your teaching perspective, or they may ask you to contribute to their projects, maybe consulting projects or something of that sort. So they will definitely expect you, but it all depends on the host who is ready to, with whom you're working during the postdoc. What should we enhance our skills if we are not getting the teaching? I think that's something which was clearly in my mind, and that's why, even though it was not compulsory for me, it was actually an additional burden for me, but I definitely wanted to keep the teaching part open. So I specifically request to either assist him in a course, or like I have taken 1 or 2 lectures as well, which was more to do with talking about diversity in India. So how diversity in India, because there was a course on diversity in India, what type of diversity you can have in India would be interesting. So I did the session also on that. So I think, yeah, that's something which is good, that you need to keep that in mind by maybe assisting a faculty, and if they allow you, take 1 or 2 sessions, which will give you some idea about it.
Okay.
I hope I have answered all of the questions.
Yes, he said.
Okay, my
Right.
pleasure.
Okay. And Rakti Mavobos, he has
Yeah,
another
please.
question. Um, Little general. It's okay. Hi, Amit Bhaiya. I hope you're doing well and in good
I'm
health.
definitely you too.
So, so his question is that he has given GRE previous year and have applied to some of the universities for 2020 fall, but it seems now impossible to go abroad and pursue PhD at least for some time from now onwards. And so he's asking what could be the best things to do, and is it possible to join a corporate or any other things he can do, like joining think tanks? And because it's been 3 years since his masters, and will this gap, though he has worked, will it increase the impact on his PhD admission later period if he joins?
See, I am not the right person to answer this question. Let me be very frank about it, because US is a very different market as compared to where I am right now. And here I am seeing a very different way of PhD as compared to India. So the way it happens in India and the way it happens here is quite different. So if you ask me from a Europe perspective, and if you had been in Europe, the Europe PhD is more like a job. So you're working under your supervisor, you are an employer on his or her payrolls, and you work on that. So I've seen what people do after their masters here is they work as an associate, as an intern, and for say 6 months or 1 year, or an associate for some time to get some idea about research, and then they apply for the PhD either within the same university or with the same supervisor, or maybe with some other supervisor. Because here, one of the important things which play an important part is your letter of recommendation. So, and if you have worked with somebody who has a good research idea, they definitely take it. So I have seen a person who may not have the best of the credentials, okay, but because of the letter of recommendation he got, he was admitted into the PhD program and is doing good in that. So it all depends on the individual rather than the. So if I put the same, and I am saying it's a very if, because US may have a different one. So the best option for you would be obviously a corporate job can do, but if you can work with some researcher who can help you out, one, to sharpen your skills, because that makes you a better candidate for a PhD, and two, provide you a good letter of recommendation. I think that's the important if you're looking for abroad, at least the US market. That's what I would say. I'm not sure that I've answered your question, but with the limited information, limited knowledge I have about PhDs abroad, this is the best I can give you.
Sure. Does anybody else have any question, either in general about PhD or on his research areas that you discussed so far? See any questions yet? Amit, Bhaiya, I just saw like 20. Maybe I just seek your quick comment. So now that we've talked about organizations and inclusion, everything, thinking academic institutions or research institutions as an organization, what abilities included to pursue research, or what is the situation like in India and abroad in terms of PhDs? In terms
See,
of
that's a very, I have to be very cautious on this one, because I'm still a part of this system, and still now, if I look at people with disabilities who have done PhDs, and I will bias will be there, because I know mostly the people who have persons with disability who have done PhDs. So there may be cases where get the admission for maybe whatsoever reasons, I don't know. But India, whether it's like management institute, I would put it, not top institute, but top management. I think people with disabilities who are joining those organizations, those institutions, good. They don't have an issue, and the organizations are ready to take, and even faculty members are fine. Whatever I have come across. But if I put it in a perspective of job, as of across any case where they refuse the person directly or indirectly because of the disability. But yes, so I don't think so, because I know there was a person who was a wheelchair user, and then there were people who like Amindor, she wanted to pursue her passion on entrepreneurship. She's part of 2-3 organizations. It's called Import Hub. So she's doing good. So I don't see any challenge in there. What I see disability as a challenge is the research. Or if you're doing disability research, that can sometimes be challenging because many times you have to be very clear about the publications. They want, obviously, as an academician, we all know that as an academician, we need to publish. And top journals look for publications which can have more citations, so that the index number can, index factor can, impact factor. Maybe the challenge comes into picture.
Right. Okay. Okay. Great.
And that's something which I also found a challenge.
Right. Sir, there's one more question by an incoming student, Bharat Malik, group in IIMC, and he's asking, how does the faculty or system influence the research work to plan the journey? Because you mentioned about your research question. So I think, how does the faculty or system?
Okay. I think if assuming that he's joining IIM Calcutta, yes, free to choose your work and free to look for things which you want to do, which has its advantages and disadvantages. Advantages because then it's up to, the responsibility lies with you to know what is happening or what has not happened in the field, right? So understanding various areas, so that once you have finished your coursework of 2 years, when you get into your thesis phase, you should have a good idea. Like one of my colleagues, she had a very good idea about on the same topic. So within a few months of her comprehensive qualifying examination, she was in a position to put a proposal in front of public, that public proposal defense, because of this particular reason. While, like in my case, I just told you that it didn't work out, so I had to come up with a new idea, which consumed a lot of time. So I would say you have a freedom which has its advantages and disadvantages. And here in Europe, especially St. Gallen, which I'm seeing right, of his or her payroll. So the person is, so you have to choose a topic which is part of that particular researcher. So like this, my guide, he's working on disability, aging, and to some extent PhDs under him. The topic is either related to a bit of disability or a bit of digitalization and aging. So that's that disadvantages. And first of all, congratulations for getting admissions, and hope to meet you sometime.
Right. Yeah, that's a good, very good answer. I agree.
Okay.
Right. All right then. Thank you very much. You have talked about your topic, as well as you've given like a lot of important advices in the process of PhD and postdoc for most of us. So I hope you'll have a great comeback to India and join one of these professors.
Yeah, hopefully, yes. Yeah, thanks a lot. Yes, it has been a good time, and hope there's some value out of it. I know persons with disability may not be a topic as maybe interesting for many of the people, but yeah, hopefully there was some things people have taken. And thanks a lot for giving me this opportunity. Yeah. All right.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone.
In the coming session, it will be a student from IIM Calcutta Public Policy Group, and interested students can join. All right. Have a good day.